my market. In some cases, it's a great affiliate because they provide local news. But if we have an impact...
Just to let you know, you can continue to watch this hearing online at cspan.org. Here on C-SPAN, the U.S. House is gaveling in momentarily, so we'll take you there for live coverage. This afternoon, a number of bills that would alter provisions of the 2010 Dodd-Frank financial regulations law. Also this afternoon, the House will begin consideration of the 2014 Defense Authorization Bill, the program and policy bill that sets $552 billion in spending for national defense and an additional $86 billion for the war in Afghanistan and other overseas operations. Votes throughout the afternoon, now live House coverage here on C-SPAN.
Prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Colonel Andrew Gibson from the Maine Army National Guard, Augusta, Maine.
For those of you who are so inclined, would you join me in a word of prayer? Gracious God, we thank you for allowing us to live in a land that is free, and we thank you for the men and women who have served to ensure that freedom. As this body convenes to create the laws of this land, might we faithfully plan for a day when war is forgotten, but that we would never forget the warriors who will have brought us to that day. Guide us that we might, through inspired legislation, be a healer of all nations, a healer of our own nation, and a healer of those who have willingly traveled far from their homes to secure our liberties, in the current generation and extending back to the formation of our great nation. Bless the men and women of this House. Give to them an ample portion of your wisdom, your courage, and especially your love, this day and forevermore. Amen.
The Chair has examined a journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentlelady from California, Ms. Hahn.
Thank you. Please join me in pledging allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Michoud, is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to welcome Colonel Andrew Gibson as today's guest chaplain. Colonel Gibson is from Pittsfield, Maine. He is a decorated veteran who served in the Maine Army National Guard for 25 years. Before being deployed to Afghanistan in 2006, he served in Bosnia in 1997 as one of the first 2 National Guard chaplains to ever be deployed to a hostile fire zone. Currently, Colonel Gibson is the Joint Force Headquarters Maine chaplain and the Director of Deployment Cycle Support. In these roles, he oversees the spiritual needs of the Maine Guard soldiers and families. He also coordinates a team of health professionals who provide support to our service members, veterans, and military families. Colonel Gibson's service also extends deep into our communities. He is a key organizer of the Maine's annual Interfaith Prayer Breakfast. Colonel Gibson is a true asset to our state of Maine and our country. I'm proud that he is my constituent, and that it is an honor to have him deliver today's prayer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back to balance my time.
Gentleman yields back. The Chair will entertain 15 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise? Without objection. The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to implore my fellow congressmen to wake up. Can't we see what's happening? In just the past month, we discovered that the NSA is snooping on millions of innocent Americans using the Patriot Act. But Congress wrote the Patriot Act. The IRS is targeting conservative organizations using the tax code. But Congress created the tax code. And the DHS has stockpiled 200 million hollow point bullets. Congress just funded the DHS last week. Do you want me to be surprised? I'm not surprised. I'm outraged. But what's happening here? In each case of executive overreach, Congress gave an inch, and the executive branch took a mile. When our civil liberties are stolen, Congress investigates and expresses righteous indignation. But all too often, Congress then turns around and funds and enables this unconstitutional behavior. If we don't reverse this trend, we can kiss our civil liberties goodbye. The Constitution embodies American principles that men and women fought and died for, to protect. We swore an oath to protect it. Mr. Speaker, I encourage my colleagues to reflect on the damage that CISPA, the Patriot Act, and the NDAA have wrought on our civil liberties, and implore my fellow members to uphold the constitutional rights they swore to protect.
Gentleman's time
Don't
has
yield
expired.
an inch.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise? The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the pivotal days for immigration reform are before us. I'm pleased that a bipartisan group of senators have come together in a compromise that could finally create a roadmap to citizenship for the 11 million people in this nation who have worked hard and contributed to the success of this nation. We're a nation founded by immigrants and working families. It's what makes this country strong. Let us not forget that nearly every American family has its own immigration story. We all pledge allegiance to the same American flag, and we all hope to achieve the same American dream. Our nation's immigration system is broken. This is our chance to get it right. Let's get it right for those young dreamers. Let's get it right for the tireless working mothers and fathers. Let's get it right for same-sex families stuck on opposite sides of the border. Together we can build an effective, fair, and inclusive system that lives up to our heritage as a nation of immigrants. Let's get it right this time.
What purpose does the gentleman from Alabama rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, where's the accountability? From Benghazi to the IRS to the Justice Department monitoring reporter emails, the trust Americans should have in their government is being shaken, and for good reason. It's unfortunate we're spending time and resources searching for answers from our own leaders. Americans have questions like, has the President been completely transparent about the Benghazi attacks? Who ordered the IRS to target conservative groups? Were more reporters monitored by the Justice Department more than just the AP and Fox News? Did Attorney General Holder mislead the U.S. Congress? Because of his failed leadership on this and other scandals like Operation Fast and Furious, I've called on Eric Holder to resign. The buck has to stop somewhere. It's time for the Obama administration to come clean with the American people. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This week, we will vote on the National Defense Authorization Act. And as we debate this important legislation, we must keep in mind the deeply troubling problem of sexual assault within our military. The vast majority of men and women who are in our armed services serve us with honor and distinction, but their dedication is undermined by those who commit sexual assaults. Last year, nearly 1 out of every 16 active duty women reported having been the victim of an unwanted sexual contact. This is a deplorable situation. Last week, in a truly bipartisan manner, the Armed Services Committee produced a bill that we will debate today. It prohibits the dismissal or reduction of guilty verdicts in the sexual assault convictions. It makes sure that those who are found guilty of these heinous crimes will be discharged from the military, and adds other important protections for victims of sexual assault. As leaders, we have a duty to protect those who protect us. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty or safety. Ben Franklin uttered those words several hundred years ago, but his warning is still relevant today. Reports that the National Security Agency has been monitoring the phone records and Internet activities of ordinary citizens should concern every American. The President has said that these surveillance programs don't involve listening to people's phone calls or reading their emails. Americans want to believe their President. Yet his tax agency lied about targeting conservative groups, and his Justice Department spied on reporters who were just doing their job.
As a nation, we would be wise to heed Ben Franklin's advice and make sure that there is a bright line between acceptable counterterrorism activities and unacceptable violations of our fundamental rights. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purposes, gentleman from Delaware rise? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to pay tribute to a fallen soldier from my home state of Delaware. Last week I joined the family of Warrant Officer Sean Mullen at Dover Air Force Base to witness the dignified transfer of his remains. Sean, whose family resides in Dover, Delaware, was killed earlier this month in Afghanistan. He was on his 6th tour of duty. He leaves behind his wife Nancy and a life full of service, loyalty, and courage. As I stood with Sean's mother Miriam, through her tears she asked me to do one thing. She said, "Let the people know what these men and women go through. Let them know what they do for their country." And that's why I'm here on the floor today, to do what this Gold Star mother asked me to do, to remember the hundreds of thousands of Americans who have volunteered out of a sense of patriotism and selflessness to put themselves in harm's way in service to their country. So to Sean Mullen and his heroic brothers and sisters in arms who have given their lives to protect ours, I stand here today to say thank you. May God bless you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas rise? Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Today, I want to highlight another potential IRS abuse, namely unfair audits of adoptive parents who filed for the adoption tax credit. We've all heard about the abuse of conservative, Christian, and other groups, but fewer people know the alarming story of families who use the adoption tax credit to offset some of the high costs of adoption. According to the IRS's own Taxpayer Advocate Service, 90% of those who filed for the adoption tax credit last year were flagged for additional review. Nearly 70% were audited, but only 1.5% of adoption credit claims were disallowed in the end. By contrast, only 1% of all tax returns are audited. Adoptive parents are loving, selfless Americans who are simply trying to provide a safe and loving home for kids in need. An adoption is a reflection of the boundless compassion of our country and helps save innocent unborn lives that may otherwise be ended by abortion. We should do all in our power to encourage adoption, not discourage it through bureaucratic runarounds. I urge the Congress to get to the bottom of this unfair treatment of adoptive parents.
What purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
Madam Speaker, I rise to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to honor Sergeant Maribel Manriquez Ramos, a resident of my district who was laid to rest this past week. Her dedication was displayed in her many promotions, commendations, and medals earned during deployments to imminent danger areas like Korea and Iraq. Sergeant Ramos served her nation with both duty and honor, both home and abroad. Back home, she was set to receive a degree in criminal justice from Cal State Fullerton this May. During her enrollment at the university, she served as an inspiration to other veterans, allowing them to preserve and to pursue their dreams through higher education. Unfortunately, our heroic Sergeant Ramos died at the age of 36. She is a hero because of the way she lived her life. She lived a life of honor and service, both as an Army sergeant, as a community leader, and to her family. I convey the deepest sympathies from all of the community, and may she never be forgotten. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. What purpose does the gentlelady from Alabama rise?
Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise in 3 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to discuss an issue that matters to all Americans, jobs and economic growth. The story got buried with all the breaking news of last week, but last month's job numbers are in and they aren't good. On the surface, the U.S. economy adding 175,000 jobs might sound like good news, but look deeper and you'll see troubling indicators for our economy. Manufacturing actually lost 8,000 jobs in total. This recovery is so weak by historic standards that it has produced 4 million fewer jobs than any other recovery since World War II. Madam Speaker, this isn't real recovery. If we are going to improve this economy and create jobs, we need less government and more freedom. Every day, House Republicans are seeking solutions to grow the economy. Let's make life work for families across the country and expand opportunities for everyone without expanding government. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purposes? Gentlelady from Hawaii, rise. Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was very proud after 9/11 when I enlisted in the Hawaii Army National Guard. Proud to continue serving as a captain in that same unit. Proud when as a private I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina in basic training and learned about the Army values of respect, integrity, and honor. Proud to be a part of an organization where strong, unbreakable bonds of trust exist between my brothers and sisters in uniform, but I am not proud that we as a country have allowed an epidemic of sexual assault in the military to continue to such great lengths today. I feel it is my responsibility to my brothers and sisters in uniform to take action to address this issue, and why I've introduced a bill to have a fair, independent, and transparent process to bring justice for these survivors and to prosecute those who are guilty. We've seen calls to action from communities across the country, headlines from the Washington Post, New York Times, USA Today, and my own local newspaper, the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, each calling for us as Congress to pass these measures. We must take action. We owe it to our selfless heroes and our servant leaders who put their lives on the line every single day for our country. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose, the gentlelady from South Dakota rise. Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last weekend I was speaking with a group of individuals and I talked about the need for a healthy economy and an energy plan where we prioritize American energy. A woman that was in that meeting stood up and she started to share her story. She started to talk about her husband had his hours reduced at work because of regulations that came out of the Obamacare bill. She talked about her kids, 2 of them teenagers, that are unable to find summer work, and how if they want to go to church during the week, if they want to play baseball games, if they want to do daily activities that normal everyday families do, they will put hundreds of miles on their car and spend hundreds of dollars on gasoline trying to make it happen. That's why our team, I am, so committed to dealing with bills that directly address the problems that these Americans face. It's why we prioritize a healthy economy that can give certainty to these struggling American families. It's important that we pass a 5-year farm bill. It's important that we make sure that food is affordable and safe in this country. It's also important that we focus on American energy and using the natural resources we have at home. And it's important that we talk about the Keystone Pipeline. We're going to continue to work to ensure that our students get educations, that they can pay off their loans when they're done, and that they can continue to pursue the American dream, just like we got to do decades ago.
For what purpose, the gentleman from California rise? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to announce a new advancement in mathematics, an algorithmic solution to the full Boltzmann equation that's taken 140 years to solve. The full 7-dimensional Boltzmann equation provides a crucial link between the microscopic or quantum behavior of atomic particles on the one hand and the behavior of matter that we humans observe on the other hand. It does this by predicting how gaseous material responds to external influences such as changes in temperature and pressure, quickly settling to a stable equilibrium. The solution of this equation gives us an understanding of the grazing collisions when molecules glance off one another, which is the dominant type of collision. The algorithm uses a range of geometric fractional derivatives from kinetic theory. I congratulate the authors, Philip Gressman and Robert Strain from the University of Pennsylvania, on this advancement and commend the National Science Foundation for supporting the scientists in their work. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose the gentleman from Tennessee rise? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. President Obama took stage last Friday in California and admitted that some Americans will see higher costs on the health care premiums, but blamed employers for shifting costs rather than taking responsibility for the damage caused by his flawed health care reform. The President also said the law was, quotes, working the way it was supposed to, end quotes. But many employers, myself included, cannot tell their employees exactly what their health insurance premiums will look like next year. Worse, President Obama neglected to include all the facts in his stump speech, touting a recent report that claimed health care would be less expensive for Californians under the law. The truth is, in California, the cheapest plan under Obamacare for a 25-year-old man is roughly 64 to 117% more expensive than the 5 cheapest policies sold today, according to the Wall Street Journal. The uncertainty around the implementation and cost of the Affordable Care Act is causing economic chaos during a time employers need stability. And it appears this train wreck is only going to get worse. Madam Speaker, Obamacare was a bad idea 3.5 years ago, and today we're seeing exactly how bad this law is and bad medicine it is for this country. I yield back.
For what purpose the gentleman from North Carolina rise? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today to draw attention to the Congressional Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Expo being held here today. For my constituents in North Carolina, investing in new forms of energy and improving efficiency can create jobs and reduce cost. The estimated 850,000 jobs in renewable energy industries are continuing to grow. Triangle Biofuels Industries in Wilson, North Carolina continues to expand each year. The Biofuels Center of North Carolina, located in Oxford, is working to replace 10% of the petroleum used in our state with locally produced biofuels. A proposed Chemtex plant stands to bring more than 300 direct and indirect jobs and increase revenue for local farmers by $4.5 million annually. This project would not be possible without a $99 million loan guarantee from USDA. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose the gentleman from New York rise?
I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I come to the House floor today to share real-life examples from my district concerning the growing trend happening all across this country because of Obamacare. My office recently received a call from Colden Repka, a 23-year-old from Attica, New York. Colden works 30 hours a week for a manufacturer while carrying a full college course load. Colden's boss recently told him his weekly hours would be cut from 30 to 20 to 25 in order to avoid the Obamacare employer mandate, despite Colden staying on his parents' health insurance policy. Just last week, Richard Markle from Clarence, New York, called my office with a similar concern. Richard is a man just trying to make some extra money for his family. His regular 32 hours per week are being reduced to less than 25 to avoid the perverse mandates of Obamacare. Mr. Speaker, Americans want to get back to work. Unfortunately, Obamacare's onerous regulations are hitting employees in ways many did not expect, and it's just the beginning. This country realizes that Obamacare is a train wreck. Just ask Colden and Richard. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to congratulate 8 outstanding students in Southeast Fort Worth that attend Morningside Middle School in Fort Worth, Texas. Lexi Stanford, Thomas Alta Marano, Alex Delgadillo, Carrie Frank, Yantrail George, Jennifer Hun, Adir Medina, and Paola Rios were all contenders in the Junior National Academic Championship. This is the first time that students from the 33rd Congressional District's Morningside Middle School participated in the qualifying competition, nicknamed the Whiz Quiz competition, and also the GE College Bowl, has been a tradition in the Fort Worth Independent School District since 1978. This challenge of knowledge requires middle school and high school academic teams to accurately answer brain-stretching questions faster than their opponents. On May 31st, these 8 students traveled to Washington to compete against other schools across the nation in the larger Junior National Academic Championship. I would once again like to commend these students on a job well done and encourage them to continue excelling in their academic pursuits. I yield back the balance, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, according to last week's jobs report, nearly 12 million Americans, 12 million of our fellow citizens are out of work. That's simply unacceptable. The American people deserve better than a constant parade of job-destroying regulations coming out of Washington. They deserve better than a government that continues to spend us further into debt. The American people deserve solutions that will create jobs today, and that's what the House Republican plan is all about. We have a plan to grow our economy and secure the future for all Americans, to expand opportunity, not government. We want to rein in massive government spending and reform the tax code to make it simpler and fairer for all Americans. That's the House Republican plan. It's one of growth, prosperity, and unlimited opportunities for all Americans. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, can you blame the American people for being dissatisfied with Washington? The most crucial issue facing our country is the need to create jobs and grow our economy. But what do the American people see? A government run amok. House Republicans know how important it is to hold the government accountable to the people. After all, that's where power comes from in a democracy. And we know that we can't grow our economy with massive, bloated bureaucracy standing in the way. House Republicans are committed to clearing out the underbrush, cutting waste, and fixing broken government. It's our constitutional duty to provide effective oversight of the executive branch, and that's just what we're going to do. That's how we secure a good future for all Americans. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise? Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, regrettably, for the American people, they see a non-recovery recovery. Millions of our fellow citizens remain unemployed and underemployed. It's why House Republicans are working to make the tax code fairer, flatter, simpler, more competitive so America can go back to work. But so far we're hearing silence from the White House. We want red tape reform that is strangling small business people. Madam Speaker, I heard one small business person in my district say, you know, it's just like the federal government doesn't want me to succeed. We need to unchain them. We need to cut the red tape and allow them to create jobs. And finally, the Affordable Care Act is not affordable for our American citizens. It is not affordable to small businesses. It is harming job creation, costing trillions of dollars, potentially millions of jobs. Republicans want to repeal it. This is an agenda to help create jobs for America when Americans need growth, hope, and opportunity. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Madam Speaker.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On July 1st of this year, student loan interest rates are set to double. This doesn't have to happen, though, and it won't if President Obama and Senate Democrats choose to work with House Republicans on a bipartisan solution. Unlike the Senate, the House of Representatives successfully acted to stop the unnecessary rate double. The President and Senate should follow a bipartisan example and build off the Smarter Solutions for Students Act. Despite the White House whiplash on this issue, our legislation is very similar to President Obama's own budget proposal. It will prevent rates from doubling, allowing students to benefit from low rates and protect low and middle income students. The House acted in a way that satisfies the President's original criteria for a long-term market-based plan. We welcome the Senate to get on board. Preserving this problem just to be able to campaign on the issue year after year would be a true disservice to every student and taxpayer. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the House Republican Conference, I send to the desk a privilege resolution and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 257, resolved that the following named members be.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be considered as read.
Without objection. Without objection, the resolution is agreed to, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes on postponed questions will be taken later today. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2167.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2167, a bill to authorize the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development to establish additional requirements to improve the fiscal safety and soundness of the home equity conversion mortgage insurance program.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensenling, and the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Heck, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous materials for the record on H.R. 2167 currently under consideration.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the bipartisan H.R. 2167, the Reverse Mortgage Stabilization Act of 2013, introduced by our colleagues, Mr. Heck of Washington and Mr. Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. H.R. 2167 provides authority to the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development to make administrative and policy changes to the FHA's home equity conversion mortgage program through a mortgagee letter rather than the arduous 18-month regulatory process. The bill sets conditions that the FHA can only use this new authority when immediate changes are necessary to improve the fiscal safety and soundness of the program. And, Madam Speaker, immediate changes that improve the fiscal safety and soundness of this program are exactly what is needed. In our efforts in this Congress and on the Financial Services Committee to help create a sustainable and competitive housing finance system for Americans, our committee and its Housing and Insurance Subcommittee have held a series of hearings this year on the financial problems at the FHA. In its current form, FHA is most definitely an impediment to a sustainable and competitive housing finance system. Because of this, the Financial Services Committee has been working to examine needed reforms to FHA, reforms that go beyond its fiscal solvency and address serious structural flaws at the FHA. Madam Speaker, there's one thing that we know for certain about FHA. It is not just broke regrettably, it is bailout broke. This is not just my conclusion, it's the conclusion of the annual independent actuarial study of the FHA's Mutual Mortgage Insurance Fund, the government fund that insures the FHA's single-family mortgages. This actuarial study shows us, and I quote, "The economic value of the fund as of FY 2012 is negative $13.48 billion," unquote. The same actuarial report states that the economic value of the home equity conversion mortgage portion of the fund, which H.R. 2167 addresses, is, quote, negative $2.8 billion. Again, bailout broke. Madam Speaker, H.R. 2167, which has strong bipartisan support, is a first and modest step in stemming substantial losses from FHA. Provides the tools needed to allow the agency to immediately address serious and significant flaws with its home equity conversion mortgage program that threaten hardworking taxpayers with being forced to fund yet another Washington bailout. That's why, Madam Speaker, I urge the passage of H.R. 2167 today. The Secretary of HUD has testified that HUD needs this authority from Congress to make immediate changes. As I said, without H.R. 2167, it could take up to 18 months for these vital needed changes to be made, during which the FHA would continue to lose money. I thank the bipartisan supporters and authors of this bill for their leadership, for their support in order to help protect taxpayers and improve and reform the FHA program, and I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to begin by reciprocating and thanking the gentleman from Texas for his leadership on this issue, and perhaps as notably the gentleman from Pennsylvania for his leadership and cooperation and collaboration in helping to solve this important problem. I thank you, sir, and more importantly, I thank you on behalf of the many people who will benefit as a result of our action here today. Madam Speaker, currently the Federal Housing Administration underwrites 100% of all reverse mortgages. Let me say that again. The Federal Housing Administration underwrites 100% of all reverse mortgages, and that is a program that is deeply troubled, as enumerated by the capable chair of the Financial Services Committee. And so if you believe, as I do, that reverse mortgages are a financial product that actually ought to be available to some people, but under appropriate circumstances and conditions, it's all the more important that we enact H.R. 2167 today. And not just because TV pitchmen, see if I can name them all, James Garner, Henry the Fonz Winkler, Fred Dalton Thompson, Pat Boone, and Robert Wagner entreat our elderly to do so, but because this legislation is very important. So the question is, as with all legislation, what's the problem? There's probably no better statement of the problem than is represented in this chart, which says that 7% of the FHA's portfolio are related to reverse mortgages, but 17% of their portfolio that is underwater is attributable to reverse mortgages. That is a stark, salient representation of why this legislation is needed. And I might add, frankly, that if you were to compare reverse mortgages across all, just the going forward 30-year fixed mortgage market, it would be even more stark. This is against all products. So what's the solution? As the chair indicated, it is to give the FHA the authority through mortgagee letter to adopt certain reforms. And the alternative is to wait and to endure the arduous rulemaking process. I had an agency in the office the other day for which I had a problem, and I sought solution through the rulemaking process. I asked them what's the minimum amount of time that would be required for adoption of rules, and they indicated the best of circumstances would be 18 months, sighed, paused, and then said more like 24 to 36 months. We can't wait that long, Madam Speaker. So what are those reforms that are likely to be adopted via mortgagee letter at the FHA? I think most notably it would require a financial assessment of potential borrowers to ensure that this financial product is suitable for them. There are others as well. It may reduce the amount of funds up front granted to the borrower, and it may require escrow for provision of payment of taxes and insurance, something that's not uncommon in the mortgage industry. But the financial assessment portion that very well may ensue as a result of passage of this legislation, it's important to note that that is a tool and technique used by the VA when it underwrites reverse mortgages. Let me say that again. The VA uses this tool to underwrite reverse mortgages. And how much of a problem does the VA have with reverse mortgages? Zero. Zero. So we know with a virtual certainty that this solution, which the gentleman from Pennsylvania and I bring to you today, will solve the problem. Finally, let me just say, this is a twofer. We don't often get the opportunity for a twofer. This will extend some consumer protection, insofar as there are consumers who will not purchase or who will purchase under different terms and conditions this product in a way that will not render them at risk as they are today. And secondly, it will inarguably improve the portfolio of the FHA. So, ladies and gentlemen, I entreat you to vote yes, and I thank once again both the chair of the committee as well as the gentleman from Pennsylvania, and I reserve the balance of my time, Madam Speaker.
And reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick, the Vice Chair of our Oversight and Investigations Committee and the lead co-sponsor of this bill.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 2167, a bill that I was very happy to work with the gentleman from Washington on this matter. It's an example of us able to work in a bipartisan way on important legislation that will, in fact, institute good common sense reforms on an important program for America's seniors. This bill is very simple. It allows HUD to institute some needed reforms to the home equity conversion mortgage program, better known as reverse mortgages, using an expedited process. The legislation requires that any changes to the program being made using the authority contained in this Act must be done to improve the fiscal safety and soundness of the reverse mortgage program. There is concern on both sides of the aisle about the financial health of FHA. Last November, FHA released its annual report to Congress on the financial status of the Mutual Mortgage Insurance Fund. There are some significant shortfalls, and the Financial Services Committee and the chairman have been diligently examining the problems there and what actions that Congress may need to take. The home equity conversion mortgage program is one of those areas that must be reformed, and this bill is going to help the HUD Secretary take some critical steps to ensure the long-term stability of that program. Mr. Speaker, it is important that we make improvements to FHA's HECM program to ensure that reverse mortgages remain an option for seniors. When used appropriately, a reverse mortgage can help seniors pay off debts, deal with unexpected expenses, including health emergencies, and improve or maintain quality of life. It can be an important financial tool for folks like Robert and Fran Chiachia of Bristol Township in my district, who because of this program had access to equity that they used to make their lives in retirement better. Their lives, Robert and Fran, and the lives of countless seniors throughout Pennsylvania that I've spoken to who were able to maintain their home and stay in their home well into their retirement years when they had no other options to do so. FHA insurance makes these products widely available while protecting against predatory practices. By using the authority granted in this Act, the Secretary of HUD has suggested reforms that protect taxpayers by making the HECM program more fiscally sound while increasing consumer protections for seniors who may want to take advantage of a reverse mortgage. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support the legislation. I appreciate the opportunity to work with the gentleman from Washington on this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
I yield back the balance of my time, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I'm ready to close. I just simply want to thank my two colleagues for their bipartisan leadership on this bill, something that is going to be very important to sustainable housing, the fiscal sanity of the FHA, and for a number of our consumers as well. I urge the House to adopt the bill, yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2167? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 634 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 634, a bill to provide end-user exemptions from certain provisions of the Commodity Exchange Act and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensingling, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Peters, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous materials for the record on H.R. 634 as amended, currently under consideration.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. H.R. 634, the Business Risk Mitigation and Price Stabilization Act of 2013, is bipartisan legislation. It will help provide America's job creators with greater certainty so that they can invest more in our still struggling economy and help create desperately needed jobs for the millions who remain either unemployed or underemployed. Again, when our so-called recovery has produced 4 million fewer jobs than the average recovery of the last 70 years, clearly nothing is more important than finding solutions that will help grow our economy and create more and better jobs for those who need them. Americans want and deserve a healthier economy and a more secure future. But regrettably, all too often, Washington either inadvertently or on purpose creates piles and piles, mountains upon mountains of unnecessary red tape for our entrepreneurs, our small business people, and our job creators. Quite often, Madam Speaker, this institution makes the goal of economic growth and job creation more difficult. But the bipartisan bill before us today is helpful. It is needed to help protect manufacturers, ranchers, thousands of Main Street businesses across the nation from unnecessary red tape that would divert their resources and time away from the activities to make their businesses successful and thus create more jobs. One manufacturer told the Financial Services Committee earlier this year, Mr. Thomas Dees, who works for a chemical manufacturing company in Pennsylvania, he testified that before our committee, without H.R. 634, manufacturers and other end users of derivatives, which this legislation deals with, would be forced to comply with unnecessary regulation that he said, quote, means less funding is available to grow their businesses and expand employment, unquote. Now, improving the Dodd-Frank Act, regardless of its relative merits, it did at least make clear that Congress intended that manufacturers, ranchers, and again, Main Street businesses that this bill is intended to address, that they would not be subject to certain regulations regarding margin requirements for end users of derivatives. Still, despite Congress's clear intent on the subject, such requirements have been proposed by Washington regulators. And so this resulting legislation would contain provisions that would modify and provide greater clarity to the Dodd-Frank Act regarding the intentions of Congress in dealing with the end user exemption. We have heard from Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke, who stated before the Senate Banking Committee earlier this year that because the Dodd-Frank Act is, quote, a very big, complicated piece of legislation, unquote, the regulators like the Federal Reserve needed, quote, clarity from Congress on what, quote, to do about end users. So H.R. 634 provides that clarity by stating clearly that end users of derivatives shall be exempt from the onerous margin requirements imposed by Title VII of the Dodd-Frank Act. As I said earlier, Madam Speaker, this is a bill with very strong bipartisan support. The Financial Services Committee reported this bill out of committee on a recorded vote of 59-0. Let me repeat that, Madam Speaker. The Financial Services Committee reported this bill out of committee on a recorded vote of 59-0. Likewise, the Agricultural Committee approved this bill on a voice vote, meaning it has received no opposition in either committee. And Madam Speaker, I should note that this is substantially similar legislation was overwhelmingly passed by the House last year with 370 bipartisan votes. In closing, I want to thank our colleague, Agricultural Committee Chairman Frank Lucas, for advancing this bipartisan bill on which our committees share jurisdiction. And I also want to thank the bipartisan supporters of this bill, particularly the gentleman from New York, Mr. Grimm, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Peters, who are outstanding leaders in our committee, as well as the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McIntyre, leaders on the Agricultural Committee. H.R. 634 is sound policy, and it is necessary to ensure that regulators do not further hurt our economy by forcing manufacturers, ranchers, and Main Street businesses to needlessly divert resources away from creating more and better jobs for an American public that is more than ready for them. Madam Speaker, I urge the House to approve this needed bipartisan legislation today, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Michigan.
I ask unanimous consent to yield 10 minutes of my time to the gentleman from North Carolina and a member of the Agricultural Committee, Mr. McIntyre, and that it be allowed to control the time.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, and I now yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I rise today in support of H.R. 634, the Business Risk Mitigation and Price Stabilization Act of 2013. I'm proud to have co-authored this bipartisan legislation with my colleague, Michael Grimm. I appreciate his hard work on this important legislation and his willingness to work across the aisle. I would also like to thank our partners on the Agricultural Committee, Representatives Austin Scott and Mike McIntyre. We all work together on this bill to keep costs down for families and small businesses for a wide range of goods and services like groceries, air travel, and autos. I would like to thank Chairman Hensarling and Ranking Member Waters for their support on this crucial legislation. While this bill improves financial regulation, this is truly a Main Street bill. Derivative end users represent a broad cross-section of businesses across our nation, from farmers worried about the price of fertilizer to manufacturers concerned about fluctuating interest rates. Businesses in all of our districts use derivatives to ensure that they pay a reasonable price for the products they need and keep consumer prices stable no matter what happens in the financial markets. This bill is about protecting businesses across Michigan and the United States that rely on derivatives to responsibly manage risk. During consideration of the Wall Street reform, there was a bipartisan recognition that regulations to curb excessive risk-taking in the financial sector should not stifle job creation in the agriculture or manufacturing industries. Michigan is a state that builds and grows things, and I will continue to fight to make sure that we always will be. And let me be clear, as a member of the conference committee that approved the final version of Dodd-Frank Act, I can say with certainty that Wall Street reform was not written or signed into law to hinder the hardworking folks building autos or growing apples. End users, companies that use derivative contracts to offset legitimate business risk, were specifically exempted from the clearing requirements, and Congress did not specifically direct regulators to require end users to post margin. Our bipartisan bill simply clarifies congressional intent that non-financial end users are exempt from the Dodd-Frank margin requirements. Forcing non-financial end users to post margin could have several negative consequences: unnecessarily increasing prices for consumers across a range of goods, slowing job growth here in the United States, and driving businesses to foreign, less transparent derivatives markets. Our bill passed the House last year with overwhelming bipartisan support because it is about protecting jobs and clarifying congressional intent. And it passed the House Financial Services Committee earlier this year, as we heard, with unanimous bipartisan support by a vote of 59-0. This bill will ensure congressional intent to protect our manufacturing and agricultural industries is carried out. I look forward to this crucial legislation passing the House later today, and I urge my colleagues to support it. I will continue to work to get the Business Risk Mitigation and Price Stabilization Act signed into law, and I thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Grimm, an outstanding member of the Financial Services Committee and the co-author and lead Republican on this legislation.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I proudly rise in support of this legislation, H.R. 634, the Business Risk Mitigation and Price Stabilization Act of 2013. H.R. 634, has been already noted by the chairman and my colleague, it's truly a bipartisan piece of legislation, and it has passed this House previously in the 112th Congress with overwhelming support. I'd like to thank my colleague, Mr. Peters, for working on this with me. This is an extremely important issue, and it was a pleasure to work across the aisle, as well as my colleagues on Agricultural Committee, Mr. Austin Scott and Mr. McIntyre. Of course, I want to thank Chairman Henseling for his leadership on this issue, as well as for his leadership as Chairman of the full committee, and also thank Ranking Member Waters. H.R. 634, as has been noted, will clarify the intent of Congress under the Dodd-Frank Act by providing an explicit exemption for the true commercial, non-financial end users of over-the-counter derivatives from having to post margin on uncleared derivatives transactions. This exemption is extremely important for job creation and economic growth, as well as price stabilization for average consumers. Despite clear legislative history to the contrary, regulators continue to misinterpret the Dodd-Frank Act as giving them authority to impose margin requirements on true end users. H.R. 634 will ensure that non-financial end users remain exempt from that margin requirement, and that the regulators do not, I emphasize they do not, exercise authorities that were not specifically given to them by the Congress. If margin requirements were imposed on these non-financial end users, it would harm our economy by very simply diverting working capital from productive uses such as reinvestment into the business or job creation. And this legislation prevents this, and that's also extremely important to protecting American jobs and our economy. True end users are firms and companies that use derivatives to manage their various financial risks. For example, firms use these products to protect against changes in interest rates if they've sold floating rate debt, as well as to protect their profits earned in other currencies from variations in foreign exchange markets. The benefits of this legislation are not limited to American businesses, but extend into the heart of our communities. This bill will help keep consumption prices stable for hardworking families and for individuals. If true non-financial end users were required to post margin, their hedging costs could become so high that they could abandon the practice. This would lead to larger variations in consumer prices for a whole host of products, which has been said, things like groceries and airline tickets, and would create economic instability. There's a study that's shown that imposing a 3% margin requirement on over-the-counter derivatives held by the S&P 500 companies could cut capital spending by $5.1 to $6.7 billion and cost 100 to 130,000 U.S. jobs. With the unemployment rate at 6.7%, this is a consequence that simply cannot be overlooked. So in closing, I ask that my colleagues once again support this common-sense, bipartisan, pro-jobs legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Michigan.
I'd yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney.
The gentlelady from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his leadership on this important issue, along with Congressman McIntyre, Grimm, Henseling, and many, many others. Madam Chairwoman, I rise today in support of H.R. 634, the Business Risk Mitigation and Price Stabilization Act. This bill will make it easier for companies to manage their risks and plan for the future by clarifying that Dodd-Frank does not require end users of derivatives to post collateral on these trades. Congress never intended for these companies to be required to post collateral on their derivatives, because that would needlessly raise their cost and could even discourage companies from prudently managing their risk. But because of a drafting error in Dodd-Frank, end users of derivatives currently face uncertainty about whether the regulators will require them to post collateral. Both Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke and CFTC Chairman Gary Gensler have stated that they support this bill because it would provide them with much-needed clarity on whether their rules on posting collateral should apply to end users. This bipartisan effort to correct a problem with Dodd-Frank is not an attempt by opponents to weaken the safeguards of the bill, but rather an attempt to make good legislation even better. Congress needs to step in and ensure that companies that use derivatives to manage their day-to-day commercial risks are not subject to unnecessary collateral requirements. It was reported out in a very strong bipartisan vote from the Financial Services Committee, and for these reasons I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support H.R. 634, and I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, at this time I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holmgren, another leader on H.R. 634.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Chairman Henserling, like many of my colleagues here, I am confident the House will pass H.R. 634 today and present this deserving bill to the Senate again. After years of inaction bordering on dereliction, it's time for the Senate Banking Committee to act on Title VII before potentially irreparable and self-inflicting harm is done to our economy. Unaddressed end-user margin requirements could lock up billions of dollars that would otherwise be put to productive use. Dollars that could go to